Okay, red light means we're on. So I will trust technology, which is a kiss of death. I'm not going to trust technology. I'm opening up LinkedIn, making sure we're good. If we are live and we are here, feel free to hop into the chat and say hello, just so Tiziana and I know that indeed you are here with us. We're live. Okay, technology doesn't lie. Hello, I'm Shed. Stephen Shedletsky, been doing a number of these lives in the second half of 2021, and it is 2022, though it kind of still feels like 2020. What is it, like December 732 of 2020, Tiziana?
That's pretty much it. Yes.
Yeah. And as hey Alejandro, hey Stacy, hey Lisa. And when Tiziana and I hopped on and started chatting, I said to her, for this year, I'm dropping the word happy from New Year. It's no longer Happy New Year. It's just New Year is, I think.
That's it.
Yeah. We are here. We're delighted to hop in and talk about curly hair upkeep for the next hour. As you can tell, Tiziana and I are well endowed in the curl department, which means, is it sulfur bonds? I think it's sulfur in
That's it. And we have all kinds of advice for fellow curly-haired people in terms of
Yes.
how to, care for such apparatus.
Yes. All the
Yes.
conditioners, all the
We
mousses,
know,
all
we
the
know them
gels.
all.
Oh wait, that's our Instagram live later today.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yes.
Yes.
This is Power for All. We're unpacking this book, which Tiziana co-authored with her colleague Julie, pardon me, and delighted to hop in, talk about Power for All. We'll talk about leadership. We'll talk about culture. We'll talk about psychological safety. I'm sure we won't be able to resist ourselves and talk about some current events as well. If you are, by the way, in a position of power in an organization, do us a favor and just, treat others with kindness and grace, because we're going through a lot. Tiziana and I both in Toronto here. COVID is real. It's impacting us in our household here. So if you see my daughter running around, it's because she's in virtual school and she might make a cameo. But Tiziana, let's hop in. How are you? What's going on? And let's hop into our topic today, which is your book and body of work.
Well, New Year is without the happy, but we do the best we can with another year. And I am just so thrilled to start it with you. We have been looking forward to this moment for a while, and we're finally here. It's gray in Toronto, but our hearts are sunny because we get to talk about these important topics. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I love your reference to the leaders, the people in positions of power. Um, I think they feel the responsibility. Many of them. I've talked with several folks in influential positions that have really tried hard to create a decent work environment for their folks.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of effort that is being put in. Everybody's pretty tired of all this effort. But I do want to give a shout out to leaders like that have, put it upon themselves to make things as good as possible for folks that are going through a lot. So kudos to them.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I'll set up where we're going to spend, our hour or so here today. But it's so interesting because one, it's what a true test of character when we ourselves are struggling. Let's say we're in positions of leadership, which we are as parents, which we are as colleagues. But if we ourselves, the struggling supporting the struggling, it'd be one thing if, leaders were unfazed by this pandemic or these challenging times, but they're not. And it's such a true test of patience, of fortitude, of character, of everything for leaders to support those who are struggling, even though they are struggling themselves. And leaders must get support themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We do forget that sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, and also, we're not blind to the fact that not all in positions of power have done good. through all of this.
Yeah.
And as always, power is a force that can be directed in all kinds of ways. And some of them are destructive and self-aggrandizing. They are. And others are incredibly generous and supportive and constructive. So this is the reality of power. It's an energy that, like every other form of energy, can be used in many, many different ways.
Yeah.
So our job is to use it better.
Yes. So let's hop in. You wrote this book. It's about certain it starts with misconceptions of power, the sort of denouement or piece around how can we actually create positive change and sort of use this atom bomb of power for good, regardless of our level of seniority. I mean, this book is for all, whether you're a frontline worker, a middle manager, young in your career, or indeed someone who does have positional power and lacks the awareness at present to know that they do. So let's talk about all of that. And then as we do here, please join in with questions, comments in the chat, because we can see you and we can see them. And we'd love to include any of your comments and especially your questions for Tiziana as we go through here.
Yeah, and I have my gaze diverting to the comments just in case I need to kind of hop on a question or a comment.
Yes.
Thank you, Brian.
And here's
yes,
one from
they're
Brian.
very pink, the glasses. They continue to be pink. Despite 2 years of COVID, they haven't lost their fortitude in many ways. So the idea of this book that Julie and I were motivated by was having seen through our research, our teaching, a lot of people who start out with very good ideas and goals and very worthy endeavors. And they could be young people that start in the world of work, activists that really want to change the ugly and turn it into beautiful. It could be somebody who's been around. They've done work. They have accomplished some things, but they're not happy with their own personal advancement, but also the impact they've had around themselves. All of these people that are frustrated by power, oftentimes, even though they realize at some level that they need it, but they are also turned off by it because there's often this underlying fear that power will do bad things to you, will turn you into a bad person.
Interesting.
Which it can. We do have a pretty overwhelming amounts of research to show that feeling powerful elicits certain reactions that are quite reliable. Two big ones. It makes us a little bit more insensitive to other people, especially people lower down, because power is defined as the ability to influence others, and it comes from having control over resources that those others want
and don't have.
And they can only if they can only get them through you, or they don't have many options beyond you, they depend on you, and therefore you have power over them. When you feel that feeling of power, when you have it or when you feel it, you know that there are people dependent on you, and you very quickly start to think that you don't need anybody. There's a sense of
invisibility,
superiority and invincibility. And that makes you uninterested in the little people, because why would I be interested? I've got my stuff, I'm fine. And it makes you self-focused because you don't feel that you need to pay attention to others. So there's a hubristic danger. There's a self-centered danger in power. So the people who shy away from it go, I don't even want to read this book. It has the word power in it, and it's kind of yucky just looking at it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people feel that way. We see it actually when we interact with organizations. And everybody wants to bring us in to talk about leadership. Everybody wants to bring us in to talk about networks. Everybody wants to talk about innovation. Everybody wants to talk about all of these wonderful things. Nobody wants to bring us in to talk about power. Power seems a little bit iffy as something to teach people. And that's an enormous misconception. Because the moment you shy away from it, because you don't think it's a worthy of your moral standing, in a sense, to engage with power, you miss the notion that power is essential to any action, any change you want to introduce into the world. You still have to influence the world around you. And so you need to understand it. You need to know how it works. And then all of those frustrations and all of those pitfalls will be surmountable, really.
So this is so good. I'm so fascinated. So I've two questions. I've written them down. You can see my handwriting. So if you need, I'm going to ask both, but we can take them one at a time, and I can ask them again. And a shout out to Brian Wish for introducing us. We wouldn't be here, and Brian wouldn't be commenting on your wonderful classes if it weren't.
He's the connector in chief.
Yes.
Talk about a good network. He has one. Yeah.
I call him Chief Mensch. So my two questions are right now. How does someone who is in power stay humble and stay both knowing and then behave in a way that even though I have power, even though there are people who depend upon me, I still know that relationships are the key to my health and my success? How do we teach that, or how do leaders, those in power, stay humble? And then I'll ask you my second question after.
Yeah, and I direct the answer to this question also to people who feel that they may be too humble. You know, the people that experience imposter syndrome, that don't have the confidence. It's an interesting twist on the answer to that question. So the way you counteract the bad effect the power can have on you is to do two things. You counteract the hubris with this humility that you just mentioned, and you counteract this self-centeredness with a sense of empathy. So you need to remind the person in the power position that they are interdependent with others, that they're not just capable of taking action on their own, that there are repercussions to the actions, and what others do also has repercussions on them, because that is the key to being motivated to think about them, because you're interdependent. So that's an essential component. So you're cultivating the sense of humility, which is defined as an awareness of your limitations,
strengths and weaknesses, blind spots,
and being aware of your limitations, and allows you to take in the input from others, which otherwise you are not interested in. If you think you know everything, if you think you are not in need of input, you're not going to be receptive to it. So how do you do that?
But I'm hearing, and I'm sure you have more to say, but I'm hearing part of the answer is the active practice of being in community and in relationship.
Correct.
Like no leader, no person in power. And I'm purposely distinguishing between, because there are people who are in power or have power, even if they don't have the title of leader.
Correct.
Right?
Absolutely. You can have, so the moment you have the ability to control my access to resources I want, you have power over me.
Yeah.
And you can have that ability even when you don't have an official title or a high rank position in a formal hierarchy.
Yep.
You may still have access to those resources. And in the book, we elaborate greatly on what the resources can be. Some of them are very material. Some of them are very psychological, very emotional. A manager who allows me to feel a sense of autonomy in how I perform my work has power, because they give me a resource we all value very deeply, which is autonomous choice. So the micromanaging manager typically has less influence over subordinates than the empowering manager. Even though empowering can feel daunting,
Yes.
because it asks a manager to relinquish control, and that can be difficult for people. But it goes back to the idea of how do you engage with power productively, so that you don't fall prey to all of these side effects, so to speak.
Yeah.
So sometimes we hang on to power because the sense of control is so reassuring, and it's very hard for us to remember that sharing power actually, most of the time, leads to better outcomes for everybody. So that goes back to your original question: how do we make it so? Because the problem with gaining power is that you become trapped into this feeling of powerfulness. You don't want to relinquish, you don't want to let go.
Yeah.
So the cultivation of humility, the cultivation of empathy become essential.
Very, very good. And I think I know one of the misconceptions you write about is that power is a thing that we possess, which means that I think my guess is that it's also a misconception, is that like power is finite, or power is something that we can lose. But I mean, in the very nature of power for all, my assumption, like, another question I have is, if we are a hierarchical species, can indeed we all have power in an organization?
Mm-hmm.
I want to believe, and idealistically, yes, if we each are aware and cultivate our strengths and know when to relinquish power to one another, based on context. But yeah, I guess that's another question: is it truly possible for all to have power?
Right. So we chose this title in part to create a bit of dissonance, the way you're describing, because it's not possible. We're not proposing an absolutely egalitarian distribution of power across everyone.
Mm-hmm.
What we're saying is that power is for all, because everybody can understand it, really understand it, not just rely on a basic intuition or some knee-jerk reaction to what power makes us feel like. So we all can understand it, and we all can harness it better. And better means two things.
Yeah.
If you feel you haven't had enough of it, you can understand enough about those resources that are valued in these interactions, in our organizations, in our society, and come up with a way to gain access to them or make them accessible to others, which gives you influence.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have had power, our greatest hope is that you will learn to use it well. And that goes back to the things we were asking earlier, this notion that power is finite, that it's a zero-sum game, is one that we need to push back on. It is not the case that if you empower me, you are automatically losing your own power. That is not how power works. And yet, that's how many people think about it. And so you go back to that manager who is asked to create a less hierarchical, less top-down, more open organization. But to do that, you have to actually make power more accessible to people lower down the hierarchy. So what we were trying to do is to educate the people that feel deprived in how to do this better,
Mm-hmm.
and to also educate the leaders to learn how power sharing can be the secret to a lot of accomplishment. That is not just individual accomplishment, it's also collective accomplishment. And eventually down the line, collective accomplishment comes back to lift you up as a leader.
Yeah.
But this is something that requires a whole lot of personal development in all of us.
Yeah.
Because even the folks that are tuning in, and I'm sorry, there's wonderful things that are happening in the comments that I'm missing here.
Yeah.
It said, Lilia, I see your lovely message. Thank you for that. It's really, I can see. Oh, you can do that. Talk
I have
about
the power.
power.
I have
You
the
do.
power.
You do not. See, I am very dependent on you showcasing comments. So that's awesome. I'm happy to be dependent on you. It makes me feel very good.
Same
But
here.
yeah, that's right. So it's the all of us today listening to this have to become sufficiently centered in who we are to be able to use power in the right way. And the right way, I say, really, I'm all out. Right means morally right, constructive, empowering, where others actually get to do good work as opposed to being squashed and used and spit out.
Command and control. Yeah.
Enough of that.
Yeah.
And I just all of these more tangible ways in which you build up leadership capability so that power use well are very important because they're practical ways to make this happen in organizations that are where most of our life unfolds. And we have to keep in mind that the world is full of autocratic leaders who hold power in their hands in most cruel ways and succeed in a sense because they don't lose their grip. So this education I'm talking about has to be speaking
Mm-hmm.
to all of us who do not aspire to that model, but see that model working in a sense, right? The nasty uses of power are often successful individually.
In the short term, for a
In the
period
short
of
term,
time. Yeah.
that's correct.
Yeah.
But what the evidence suggests is that systems in which power is more distributed tend to produce greater prosperity in the long run.
Mm.
This is true from an economic standpoint. We see economic analysis that shows over the long run, economic systems with less inequality create more growth. Now, we can argue about growth and in our planet that is not doing so well, where the growth is really to be understood in the same way right now
Mm-hmm.
as we have over the past couple of 100 years. But the notion economically, power concentration is not beneficial to the prosperity of the system. Sociologically, great disparity in power create a huge amount of resentment, anger, frustration, fear. And those forces are profoundly destructive to the quality of life, to the well-being of a society and the people in it. So we know these things.
Yeah.
They're not mysterious. It's very clear that that's the case, but we still need to, in my view, you have to work on us individually to make us strong enough to give power away. It's an act of strength to
Yes.
give power away and allow others to have valued resources instead of hoarding them.
Which lifts all up as well.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. But we have to get there psychologically.
So, but this is why I love that you point to, every single leadership development program and we'll pull some comments and questions in the chat because they're rolling in. King, I see your question. We'll pull it in. This is great. Every leadership development program I've ever partook in, whatever the word is, that I've participated in, and that I've also facilitated for others. Every single one begins with a module on self-awareness, on leading self. And so I love that you point to personal development, that, you know, I think we can equate, there's a correlation between arrogance and insecurity, confidence and security.
Absolutely.
And so I think you're pointing to leaders need to be confident to actually relinquish and empower.
That's right. And, you know, it's Adam, our friend Adam Grant, that I salute, talks about humble confidence. I think that's how he talks about it.
Yeah.
Or confident humility. And I don't remember which of the twists he uses in his book. But, you know, that's a good point, because, and it relates directly to power. If you have to develop an awareness of your limitations that coexist with an awareness of your gifts and capabilities. You need that. Otherwise, the imposter syndrome and the insecurity quickly devolves into bad behavior, because the insecure is very fearful of losing control over their reality and losing their self-esteem.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of bad things happen. Now, how does it relate to how we design organizations? Because I see, you know, Alejandro has a question around hierarchy. And yeah.
So here, this is Alejandro's question.
There's a competent. That's right. So there are different ways to understand hierarchical systems. There's also an order and a predictability about a hierarchical way of making decisions that can be very beneficial. So when we were facing the beginning of the pandemic, and there was a question about, do we need to have systems that tell people what to do, as opposed to letting people decide for themselves what works best in that moment? So I kind of improvise it in a sense. And both things are true. You still need some centralization of decision making, because otherwise it's chaos. And chaos is not necessarily beneficial in a crisis. You need somebody that organizes our collective thinking. So it is an interesting. We don't want to give hierarchies a bad name, but we do need to give power concentration a bad name, because you can have a hierarchy where people at all levels have decision-making capabilities and power. I want to do a shout out to a wonderful book. I happen to these two that I keep putting them back on the shelf, and I keep bringing them out. So, so this is one of them. This book is all about.
And it's called Humanocracy.
Is that right? Humanocracy, correct. And it's about creating organizations that, as a matter of fact, they don't talk about power. Gary Hamel and Michele Zanini are the authors. They don't talk about power directly, but it's all about power, what they're describing. This notion that we have allowed our organizations to become so bureaucratic and so top-down and so hierarchical in the bad way that Alejandro is referring to, without understanding that the only way to make organizations effective is to give people at all levels a level of autonomous decision-making and choice, so that they can contribute their knowledge of how a business works, how a social enterprise works, because they are in the front lines, because they are interfacing with the technology used in their organization, because they really get it in a way that people higher up the hierarchy do not.
Yep.
But when I asked Gary and Michele, how do you get, they have examples, right, or leaders who have done this, who have in fact broken down the power hierarchy to create organizations that work better. They work better for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
They work better as a collective. They work better for the individuals in it. I mean, it's across the board, just plain better. And the question was, because you prompted me with your comment about leader development. Who are these leaders that you describe here who've done this thing? What led them to do it? Because again, it takes a pretty strong person to do such thing.
To empower, to give
To
power.
empower, to say, I don't need to have control, to have my fist around control.
Yeah.
I don't need it. I'm completely comfortable with delegation, to empowerment, to creating structures where decision making is really distributed, where I actually give the ability to give input, channels for input from down up everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
where I don't need yes men and yes women around me. I mean, it takes strength to do that.
Yeah.
And they were describing to me people who, for their own personal experiences, their path through life had gotten to that point. But we may have to make that scalable. We cannot just rely on 3 or 4 leaders who got this for themselves and are able to do it for others. We need to scale it. And that's where systems to remind people of their interdependence with others.
Yeah.
Systems that measure, are you behaving like a humble leader or not? And give me that input. Those become essential because we need to cultivate these capabilities in so many of us, not just the few who, for whatever path through life they have experienced, get there. We need many more of them. And we need, by the way, all the autocratic leaders of the world to have a serious, in that case, development may not be enough. We need some lobotomy, more radical approach.
At least an intervention.
They have some serious problems.
Yeah. Well, so
otherwise they wouldn't need to conduct themselves the way they do.
So part of what gives me hope in this conversation and hope in general is that it is possible for leaders to transform. Transformation, in my experience, isn't accidental. I think leaders have an experience that is personal, that they appreciate, and then transformation is an inside-out job. A sort of cheeky question I have for you is: have you ever met or know in history an example of a self-assured or secure dictator or command and control leader? Like, are those oxymorons?
I have not. And I think that, if you analyze some of these autocratic leaders, you see the depth of what they're compensating for. There's a wonderful analysis, actually. I love this. Let me extract the earbuds 1 second.
Yeah. This earbud extracting moment is brought to you in part by.
We put them in.
Yeah.
Small technological operation here. This is a great book on Vladimir. Yes.
Heard of him. Yeah.
And Fiona Hill is one of the authors. And it's a tome. But what you see here is the psychology of a man like Vladimir Putin.
Mm-hmm.
That speaks to your question. There's a lot that when you need to ride a horse bare-chested and score 25 goals in a hockey game, you clearly you need to demonstrate certain things.
Yeah,
and
security. You're dependent upon validation.
It appears to be the case, yes, for a lot of these people. And this notion that the desire to, sometimes there is an ideological and that there's a cultural twist to it. So when I would imagine If I listen to Fiona Hill and the people that understand the psychology of somebody like Putin, or some Xi Jinping for that matter, they really do want their nations to have prominence in the world. There's an attachment to their nations to be great powers in the world. So it's not just them individually. There's also a desire to not be lesser agents on our planet. So there's something that you could think of it as a pride, right? It's a pride in their culture, in their national roots.
Yeah.
I can understand that. There's some ideology behind it, but for sure, when you can't, you first are unable to achieve something collective beyond that, you've lost sight. You've lost sight of our interdependence as humans.
Yes. Well, to your point, I don't think it's a bad thing for a leader of a country to wish that their country has power in the world. I think that's fine, so long as it isn't abusive power that knocks other nations down. I'm fine with that. But I think you're saying the way in which it manifests can be destructive. And I feel bad for the goalie who has to play in that hockey game and suppress their power.
For sure. Yeah. There's no question. And also it very much depends on what kinds of values your nation, your country represents, and are they good values or not. I mean, a country where you stifle dissent, you make it impossible for bad news to travel up, you make it impossible to speak the infamous truth to power.
Yeah.
Those are not values that I'm willing to subscribe to, because we understand very well how detrimental they are to all of us who inhabit this planet. When you have values that are all about greater riches, greater wealth for the few, and many of our countries are like that. Many of our liberal capitalist systems are like that. The United States is the most clear example, but it's not the only one. Even in Canada, where you and I are, the top billionaires became richer during the pandemic. So it's a pretty common pattern. So do I want a country that is all about increasing wealth and allowing it to become super concentrated? Do I want that value of success to be part of what we bring to the world? No, I don't. So I am fine with a leader who wants to propagate the values of their country and use their power to do so, but they have to be values that we're willing to subscribe to. So one of the things we close the book with is, what will we value as individuals and as societies? What is going to be our focus? And then you can decide, do I want to support regimes because they do some things right? Maybe. Do I want to support a liberal capitalist society because it does some things right? What do I not want to support? Those are things. Those are questions we have to ask ourselves and act accordingly.
And so then this again, the knowledge and the action of power. It's like I'm sure you saw in December the company Better.com that does online mortgages or whatever it is, laid off 900 people in a 4-minute Zoom call. And publicly the outcry was significant. And friends of mine who I've had on this show, if you want to call it a show, Melissa and Jonathan Nightingale, wrote a great article on this called "What's Your Scorecard?" Because our power as consumers, as citizens, as employees is in examining what's the scorecard. So the scorecard of Better.com is short-term financial profitability and putting shareholders first. Great, not my scorecard. So I'm not going to buy from them. I'm not going to recommend that people work for them. And similarly, as long as we have enough power to choose where we can live, we can choose to align ourselves and live in a society, community, country that most closely aligns with our values. And I think it's a responsibility of leaders to not lie about their values and to come clean. That's where integrity lives, perhaps. But just a few thoughts there.
No, that's right. We do have some power to make those choices. And they also involve who we vote for as our political representative, which can be very difficult in all of these cases because the transparency, I really understanding what goes on in an organization sometimes is very hard to pinpoint, but it's possible to do. The trouble with all of this is that sometimes you run out of good choices because think about the big technology companies.
Mm-hmm.
They have power to an extent that really rarely is demonstrated in our economic world. What do? Because they do many things really well and really right. They have given us technology that has made our lives a lot easier and better and more open and more capable of really resonating with knowledge and tapping into parts of the world that would have been precluded for us.
Mm-hmm.
But because we've allowed immense power concentration to happen in big tech, we have exposed ourselves to giving away a lot of our power because so I connected upon your instructions to this call with Chrome, right? I use
And
Google
it's not
Chrome.
my instruction; it's the instruction from the provider StreamYard.
Correct.
Yes.
So we are very, very dependent. And could we use other browser? Yes, we can. Do we? Well, it's pretty convenient to
Yeah.
use one that we know works.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do. So, it becomes very important then that we not only do we make choices, which are in our consumer behavior, in our daily choices about who do I work, where do I live, but that we are connected with the systems, the legislative, political systems that decide how much power concentration are you allowing these companies to achieve. And we've been very blind in the past 10, 15 years
Yeah.
to what happens when you allow big tech to just run amok and do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah.
That is
Without
essentially
regulation.
without regulation, without intelligent regulation, without thinking through how do we develop it together with people who have technical expertise, but also ethical and legal and human expertise. How do we make those people talk to each other? These are things that are fundamental and they're more structural interventions because I cannot ask, I see Tahira. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Maybe it's Tahira. Maybe, perhaps. I hope so. Um, I can ask you to make these choices more consciously. So my son boycotted Kellogg for a number of weeks, even though he's a cereal lover. But he deprived himself of cereal, of Kellogg cereal, because of there was a unionization attempt going on at Kellogg that the company was pushing back on, and so there was a movement of young people interested in putting a little pressure. Okay, it's one way in which these choices you're referring to manifest themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Are they enough? No, they're not. They're something. And there's no question that we can collectively activate a lot of pushback on bad behavior. But we need to understand that power plays out across all these levels. It's in our personal lives, but our personal lives is completely enmeshed with the political systems and the legal systems around us. So as citizens, that's when I said, in my post about our conversation today, yes, this power is about you accomplishing your goals and having some grip over your own existence, as opposed to being slapped around by the winds that others blow on you.
Mm-hmm.
It has to do with you having the impact and achieving your aspirations for the impact to you, your own life, the life of your family, your coworkers, whoever, right, in your circle.
Mm-hmm.
it also has to do with us becoming more intelligent citizens. They don't let these big decisions about how much power do we give this corporation or this politician or this body of government or these workers in this company. These are big decisions. So when you understand power really well, you read a book like this and you go, yes, sir. Yes, sir. There are ways to design organizations, our hierarchies, as we see in the chat, this conversation, that are in fact sharing power. And that works much better. But it requires leaders who have a hold of themselves that are able to do it. And they're also okay with not getting all the accolades. Another book I like, my friend Linda Hill's Collective Genius, she talks about leadership that is not the traditional model. I am on the mountain.
Yeah, top down.
And I will give you the wisdom of my vision and the power of my inspiration, and you will follow, and we're going to do stuff together.
Yeah.
She said, well, there are too many of our businesses, too many of our endeavors that are too complex for a leader to be able to come from the top and say, yo, here you have it. I figured it all out. Now you just have to execute.
And they're totally disconnected from the information on the ground. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's really a matter of collecting. And she talks about one of the figures that she analyzes is Ed Catmull. Have you ever heard of Ed Catmull?
No.
Okay. You're one of a gazillion people. But you've heard of Steve Jobs, eh?
Yes. Of course.
You've heard of Tim Cook. You probably, I'm saying. We hear about these charismatic, big leaders that are, the Steve Jobs of the world that have genius, Elon Musk, they have genius, right? They're geniuses, and off they go and they come up with all this great stuff. And then they have to drag along these losers who don't get it. I was hearing an interview with Elon Musk that was saying, I wish I could. I desperately want to delegate. I desperately want others to carry some of the load. But I'm not finding people who can handle it. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, which I don't blame you entirely for it. There are people who have genius capabilities. Fine. Then you have leaders like Ed Catmull, who nobody knows about. He is the leader of Pixar. Pixar is an exceptional organization. Yes, sir. They've done exceptional things, really pushing innovations that were absolutely unprecedented. They continue to do that. And the leader of this company is unknown to the masses. Why? Because his job, the way he thinks about it, is not to be on stage aggrandizing. He never goes on stage like all of those guys I mentioned before always do. They present the latest phenomenality that they have come up with. His job is to create a stage for others, talented, great people, to do their best work. And do so harmoniously in a way where different voices are heard, are allowed, are encouraged, are supported, and we don't shove dissent under the rug. And if you dissent with me as your leader, I only say thank you. It takes somebody with a lot of strength and conviction about, again, humble confidence. I know what I'm good at. I know what I can do. I know what I need input, and I embrace it. But you have to be careful with not being receiving the applause.
Yeah.
Right. And that's ego taking over. A lot of these people really, really, really want the applause.
This is good.
I don't mind the applause myself. I mean, I'm an expressive social style where I love the applause, but still, we need to find in us to understand that there's so much that we can learn from others to do something together that is so much better than what we can do individually, and by shoving people up and down the power hierarchy, that's my greatest hope.
Yeah.
That we find ways to instill that sense in more of us.
I think that, because I similarly don't mind the spotlight and enjoy the applause, but I think I once heard someone who's a stand-up comedian who was very nervous to do a stand-up set, particularly because the lineup and the people going before them were really good. And their friend reminded them that laughter and applause isn't finite, it's infinite. which means, you're allowed to love the applause, and you're also allowed to love the applause for others.
That's right.
And to help create the applause for others as well.
That's right.
Nice.
And also, recognize. I like this image you just given us, because when you become aware of that somebody's better than you in something, it also gives you freedom and motivation to find the other things that you're good at, that you can contribute. What can you contribute? When you recognize, when you're capable of recognizing that somebody excels at something in a way you don't, you find in you other things that are contributions. I'll give you an example that is a little far off from the typical conversation, but I like it because it was a revelation. I'm a big, huge fan of Ella Fitzgerald. I have been a fan for, I don't know, a long time. And the story of how she started, the first time she sang in public, was at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. And they were doing acts, people going on stage, doing their thing, and see if the audience, very demanding, very competent audience, would approve of them or boo them.
Yeah, right? A powerful audience.
A very powerful audience, because they come with, first of all, you want their approval because they are very good at discerning good artistry versus not.
And if you don't get their approval, you're literally booed off stage.
You are. They were nasty. I mean, the accolades could be fantastic because great expressiveness, but also the booing is just crushing. So Ella Fitzgerald was like 15, I believe, and she intended to this little audition as a dancer, and she was preceded by an act of some sisters who were phenomenal dancers, and everybody was acclaiming them, and Ella Fitzgerald is supposed to come out next, and she says, "No way, I'm gonna dance after them." And she's like, I can't compete with these people. And so she went out there and she sang instead. She sang a little song. And the people in the audience immediately recognized the genius. She was swinging so bad, right? It was just amazing. And one of the dancers in the audience said, "It got so quiet, you can hear a rat piss on cotton." That's how she put it. And this is the beginning of Ella as a singer that was triggered by recognizing the greatness of others. People like Ed Catmull recognize the greatness of others, and that's what allows them to make the most of their greatness, as opposed to, and he said, I can do other things, because you still need a leader to create the stage. It's essential to have good leaders that can do that work. Not everybody is able to do it. So when you encounter one, oh my God, be grateful. Even though they're not the smartest person, they're not the most technically advanced.
Confident, yeah.
They have capabilities that are unique. Just like when Ella recognized, I'm not necessarily the greatest dancer, but I'll try my best. I give my shot. It's
yeah,
singing.
And she has such a unique voice. That's so cool.
Yeah. Yes.
So we're nearing close here. I have a couple things I want to run by you before we close out. I'm also so appreciative of the comments here and people helping each other out, sharing references to names. Ed Catmull, the book Collective Genius. I love it. So thank you for that. Yeah. Two things. One, a concept. Now it's my time to bust out a book. I read too, A very good friend of mine, Rich Davini, wrote this book, The Attributes. Rich is a retired Navy SEAL commander and understands leadership better than most I've met. One of the things that he's taught me and we teach in a class that we do on Build Trusting Teams is a theory called dynamic subordination. So Rich was in a room with, 100 senior leaders, and they asked Rich, how do you create the optimal task organization chart, like the best org chart? And Rich, he didn't quite know the answer, but he knew what the answers weren't. So we said, well, it's not your hierarchical top down, which ironically much of military is designed that way. It isn't the flat organizational structure, because though it's nice in theory, it doesn't scale. And if it's completely flat, the one on the right doesn't know what the one on the left is doing. We actually need a little bit of hierarchy and leaders in certain contexts. It's not the Robert Greenleaf's upside down pyramid, which is a lovely concept of servant leadership. It just doesn't scale if all the onus and responsibility is on individual contributors or those who don't have power. I think those who do have power have to take accountability and responsibility, especially when the stakes are high. And so Rich describes dynamic subordination, which the shape he draws is a amoeba blob looking thing. And he says to the room, where does the leader sit here? And people say in the middle and on the outside and in the Bay of Fundy. And, and he goes, yes, you're all right. And the answer is the leader is where the leader needs to be. And so I think leadership is contextual and leadership is dynamic. Like if you and I were co-pilots of a plane, you and I are in charge of the vessel and of all the passengers and crew on that plane. We get clearance from air traffic control to taxi out. We follow air traffic control. We subordinate to them. We don't just go, now we're just going to go there and go to the runway. But let's say we get a call from the maintenance officer and the maintenance officer says, come back, there's an issue with your right wing. You and I don't go, nah, we're good. We subordinate to the person whose job it is, right? And so I think that's part of leadership here, is the willingness to subordinate.
No question. And this is a wonderful way to think about power sharing, that it doesn't mean relinquishing. It means allowing others to have influence in that moment because the task requires it.
Yeah.
And a lot of our jobs and tasks and roles require this dynamic subordination, this the dynamic power distribution, where you don't let it become rigid in certain places, because that is not how our systems function. So even in Humanocracy, when they describe different ways of designing organizations, they talk about multiple different ways, but they all have this idea there are multiple. The locus of power is varied. There are pockets of power in many different places in the organization, so that when the time comes that I need you guys over there to come up with something because I can't, I don't have the visibility, I don't have the insight, you have the power to make that decision.
Yeah.
You have the power to suggest that improvement, and I hear it. And there are channels, however, that need to be designed for that. Design is not bad. Design is good. But I very much like this imagery of the dynamism of the power distribution, because I think it can give us some comfort to those who are very uncomfortable sharing power, to say it's dynamic. It's not that you relinquish it today and that's it, you're done, no more power for you, baby. It's not how it works. It's these cycles where there are going to be times when you are essential to the action, and other times when you subordinate to the power of others.
And I appreciate I appreciate you said the task requires it. I'll even say, or the opportunity affords it. Which is nice. I can do this. I can do this better than you, but the stakes are low enough that if you make a mistake, it's a bullet hole above the waterline, and this is an opportunity for growth and development. That is leadership, to say you take control.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Very nicely put. As always.
Thank you. Do you have one more minute? I want to run something by you, or do you have to hop at the top of the hour here?
No, I'm completely fine as long as our wonderful folks can take it.
Well,
Can
so
take more minutes.
I quickly ran this by you because we spoke about values, we spoke about culture, we spoke about leadership and power. So this is a can you see this, Tiziana?
I can.
So
Yes.
this is an equation for culture that I've come up with, and I want your feedback on it. And by the way, I've taken note. I have to read Collective Genius because if I'm writing a book on speak up culture, it seems as though I should definitely study this leader at Pixar Ed. So culture equals values multiplied by behavior, and behavior is amplified by power. Mm-hmm. So I can explain it briefly. One of the things you shared, which I think is interesting, is how do we have a barometer on values? Because can we judge values as good or bad, or just values are? And either we align with those values and wish to behave into them, or nah, like not for me, I don't agree with it. So I say values multiply by behavior, because for a culture to be strong, the people part of that culture need to know what the values are, need to know what the values look like when they're behaved, and then behave them. Because anything multiplied by 0 is 0. Anything multiplied by a negative is a negative. And the more power you have in a culture, the more your behavior influences the output of that culture. Meaning if you hire someone who's junior and they either don't know the values or don't live the values, but if you're a senior leader and you either don't know or don't live the values, that's an issue. So I'd love your feedback on that.
I think it really touches on many fundamental things about how power plays out in an organization. So you're right that culture is lived values, right? So the values as they manifest in behavior, that's actually culture. I can make a statement that these are our values, but if nobody behaves accordingly, that's not the culture. You don't have. The culture is the actual behavior of people, how they understand the values and live them. So that combo is very much where it should be. Power interacts with these things in very interesting ways, because the values of what the culture of the organization, so what the organization actually values in terms of really shaping behavior, not just talking, not just having a statement, okay, determines whether you have power, because power comes from having control over valued resources. So if the organization values certain things and I have access to those things, I will have power, because the organization will depend on me to some extent to get those things. So if the organization only values money, profit making, I will have power if I am a rainmaker for the organization.
Performance, okay?
If the organization values impact on the community, it's a social enterprise, I will have power if I have ideas, capabilities, influence internally to create this impact. So power is very much intertwined with what is valued.
Ooh, interesting.
Also, power allows you to reshape what we value. Suppose that you are, in fact, in a position that you don't approve of how your company is behaving. Maybe they're not actually supporting frontline workers during the pandemic in the way they should, and you want to change that. Maybe they're not understanding the environmental crisis that really envelops us, and they're not doing enough. Then you can use power, oftentimes power with, meaning not just you alone, but coalescing with others who share your values and want others to hear them and adopt them. So in a sense, power can reshape the values. What we see people like Greta Thunberg doing is an attempt to really penetrate our collective brains and reshape what we value.
Interesting.
She talks about these dreams of endless growth, this illusion, this impossibility. That's a reshaping of the values, which we should not, in fact, just what she's saying, we cannot and should not value growth per se in that way anymore. So she's using the platform that she's created with all these young people in a collective movement to reshape the values that eventually, if all goes well, linked to the behaviors you were talking about in your equation, to produce new cultures.
Yep.
Cultures that understand that we are on this little planet together, that exploiting it. This is a classic example of how power, the asymmetries and power concentration in the long run destroys everything. Because if you exploit the planet, you benefit from it for a long time, and then at some point there's no more planet to there's no more planet to enjoy to use.
There's a planet, but it's now inhabitable to us.
Inhabitable to us. So you made a lot of money for a while, but now you're dead. And by the way, we all end up that way anyway. So that's the idea. So in that sense, power interacts with the values and the behaviors. It enables certain behaviors, and it can also, that are determined by the values that are at play in that moment.
Yep.
But it can reshape the values too.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
That's why we need it so badly. That's why we all need it so badly, because we don't need to accept the values as they are. But you have to understand what values should we pursue. And I am here to say that we should pursue values that understand that we are interdependent on one another, the mutual dependence, this dynamic, allowing the fact that there are moments where I'm going to be dependent on you. There are moments you're going to be dependent on me. And in that mutuality, we do the greatest work we do. It's not in the asymmetry that we do the greatest work. It's in the mutuality, where I need you and you need me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I think this is a good place to pause. I have so many more questions. I want you to define empower. I want to talk about authority and power, but I'm just going to leave us with a little George Costanza wanting more. Maybe I can influence Tiziana to join us again to talk more about all that and how we can all unleash the power of our curls. Tiziana, this is the book. Give it a read. It is very good and very worthwhile of your time if you want to use your power, share your power, gain power, all for the benefit of us all. Any closing words or thoughts before we say goodbye today? This was such a treat, and I know we could keep going for another hour, if not many more.
We could have talked all night, as they say. I want to say thank you to everybody who joined in. I wish we could have had even more interaction, but I recognize many friends and former students and wonderful people that I have encountered, and many new ones that I don't know yet, that I look forward to meeting. And I thank you all for participating and being fantastic with your commentary. You're gonna download it so that I can actually read it thoroughly?
Yes,
the comments?
All the comments.
And I follow up with folks as needed. And yes. I want to thank you, Shed, so much. I knew we would have this wonderful, sparkling dialogue, and there's a lot more in your brain that I wanted to bring out, but I ended up doing most of the talking. So next time we'll do it the other way.
We can change seats.
I'll interview you and see where we go. But thank you for the opportunity. I really loved it.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining. We'll see you again soon. I believe I'm on again definitely later this month with Michael Bungay-Stanier. He's coming out with a new book called How to Start. He's the author of The Coaching Habit. So that'll be a great one as well. Tiziana, thank you again. Everyone, stay safe out there and share your power for the benefit of all. We all have the choice to do so because we depend upon each other. I think there's no better note to end on than that. So thank you, Tiziana. We'll see you soon.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year.
New Year.
I said it.
New Year.